The universe did not scream when the 100 angels died. It went silent, a terrified, unnatural silence that stretched across the vacuum, suffocating the stars themselves. Goku stood amidst the drifting particles of what used to be the Guardian Army. His chest heaved, the vertical slits of his crimson dragon pupils narrowing as the red steam of the forbidden bloodline hissed against the cold of space. The halos of the fallen flickered and vanished, one by one, like candles pinched out by a giant's fingers. He had expected more resistance. He had expected a war. But the dragon breath had been absolute erasure not of matter, but of divine law. But then, the temperature of the cosmos dropped to absolute zero. There was no explosion. There was no roar of energy. There was simply a presence, a pressure so dense, so ancient, and so terrifyingly polite that it made Goku's dragon scales rattle against his skin. High above the carnage, a small figure descended. He walked upon nothingness as if it were a marble floor, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable, his halo distinct from all others. The Grand Priest had arrived, and for the first time in the history of existence, the Father of Angels was not smiling. Before the very fabric of this dimension shatters under the weight of a sin that cannot be forgiven, bind your soul to this timeline. Subscribe and witness the end of the divine order. So the legend of the dragon god does not fade into the void. The cosmos did not mourn the death of the 100 angels. It simply ceased to function. The vacuum of space, usually alive with the hum of cosmic radiation and the distant, unseen drift of stardust, had frozen into a terrifying tableau of stillness. There was no wind to carry the ashes of the divine, no gravity to pull the debris of the shattered Guardian Army. There was only Goku, and the suffocating realization that he had committed a sin so profound that the universe itself was afraid to breathe. Goku stood suspended in the nothingness, his chest heaving with the rhythm of a beast that had just learned how to hunt. The transformation Zalama had granted him, the forbidden dragon bloodline, was still settling into his marrow. It was a painful, searing intrusiveness. Thick, crimson scales armor-plated his forearms and neck, shimmering with a wet, organic sheen that seemed to drink the meager light of the distant stars. His eyes, once the warm onyx of a Saiyan or the silver of ultra instinct, were now vertical, reptilian slits of burning gold, drowning in a sclera of blood red. He exhaled, and a plume of crimson steam hissed from his lips, dissolving a drifting piece of an angel's halo upon contact. The power coursing through him was not ki. It was not the calm water of the angels or the raging fire of the Saiyans. It was something older. It was the heavy, molten lead of the primal age, the raw material of creation before the gods had imposed their laws. It felt invincible, or at least, it had felt invincible 10 seconds ago. Now, the heat in Goku's veins was rapidly cooling, replaced by a sensation that no warrior in the history of existence had ever truly felt before, the biological certainty of extinction. Above him, descending from the tier in the dimension where the light of the angel realm spilled through, was a single figure. The entity was small, almost delicate, clad in tunic robes of teal and gold that did not ripple, for there was no force in this universe bold enough to disturb the air around him. His hands were clasped behind his back in a posture of eternal patience. A pale blue halo, distinct and perfectly circular, hovered behind his head, not spinning, not glowing, simply existing as an absolute truth. The Grand Priest. He did not fly. He merely altered his coordinates in reality, stepping down an invisible staircase of dominance. As his foot touched the empty space level with Goku, the remaining particles of the 100 dead angels, the dust of their bodies, the sparks of their staves instantly vanished. They were not blown away. They simply ceased to be, erased by the sheer proximity of their progenitor, as if their failure had made them unworthy of existence in his presence. Goku's dragon pupils narrowed to needle points. The scales along his spine flared outward, a reflexive, animalistic response to a predator that sat at the very top of the food chain. For the first time since leaving Earth, since the betrayal of Whis, since the agony of the Forbidden Realm, Goku felt a tremor in his hands. It was not fear of death, it was the overwhelming pressure of authority. The Grand Priest looked at Goku. The gaze was heavy. It felt as though a planet had been placed gently, but firmly, upon Goku's shoulders. There was no anger in those violet eyes, no hatred, no thirst for vengeance. There was only a hollow, terrifying disappointment that felt colder than the vacuum of space. "It is a rare thing," the Grand Priest said. His voice did not travel through sound waves. It manifested directly inside Goku's mind, clear and bell-like, bypassing the ears and resonating in the soul. It was a voice that sounded like the end of a book. To see a mortal cast aside the gift of existence with such violent enthusiasm, the priest continued, tilting his head slightly, observing the red scales on Goku's skin as one might observe a fascinating, cancerous tumor. "We spoke of your potential, son Goku." He spoke of a primitive charm, a chaotic will that could perhaps one day amuse the king of all. But this, the Grand Priest unclasped one hand and gestured vaguely at the empty space where his children had stood moments ago. "This is not amusement. This is an infraction." Goku grit his teeth, the growl rising from his throat sounding more like a grinding of tectonic plates than a human voice. The primal power roared within him, urging him to strike, to bite, to tear down this pillar of arrogance. But his Saiyan instincts, the part of him that was a martial artist, screamed at him to freeze. Every nerve ending in his body was warning him that any movement would be his last. "They stood in my way," Goku rasped, his voice distorted, layered with the guttural echo of the dragon. "They tried to stop me. They were enforcing the quarantine." The Grand Priest replied softly, "You carry the blood of Zalama. You carry the chaos of the First Era. You are a contagion, son Goku. And my children, they were merely the immune system." The Grand Priest took a step forward. The space between them collapsed. Suddenly, he was mere inches from Goku's face. Goku hadn't seen him move. The dragon eyes widened. The Grand Priest reached out a small, pale finger and tapped the center of Goku's chest, right where the red scales were thickest. "And I," the priest whispered, his violet eyes darkening, "am the cure." The tap was light. It should have felt like a feather. Instead, it felt like the core of a star collapsing. Crack! A spiderweb fracture exploded across the indestructible dragon scales, covering Goku's chest. The sound was sickening, wet and sharp, like bone snapping under a hydraulic press. Goku gasped, the air forced out of his lungs in a violent retch, his eyes bulging as the force of the tap traveled through his ribcage, bypassing muscle and scale to rattle his very soul. He was launched backward, the vacuum of space blurred into streaks of black and white. Goku flew for hundreds of miles in a heartbeat, crashing through the debris field of a shattered asteroid belt. Rock and ice disintegrated against his back, but he couldn't stop. He couldn't stabilize. The momentum wasn't just physical, it was a command. The Grand Priest had ordered him to move, and the laws of physics were obeying with terrified haste. Goku slammed into the surface of a desolate, barren moon, the impact throwing up a mushroom cloud of gray dust that reached the exosphere. The ground buckled, cratering inward, turning the moon's surface into a jagged bowl of ruin. Goku lay in the center of the crater, coughing up globs of golden blood. His chest burned. He looked down. The red scales, which Zalama had promised were harder than Kachin steel, were shattered. A perfect, circular bruise was forming on his skin beneath, radiating a cold, numbing pain that spread to his fingertips. "Damn it!" Goku wheezed, pushing himself up on trembling arms. The primal power surged in response to the injury, the red aura flaring up like a wounded animal lashing out. The scales began to knit themselves back together, steam hissing from the wounds. He didn't even use ki. He looked up. High above the moon, a speck of teal light was descending, slowly, leisurely. The Grand Priest was not rushing. He had no need to. He was descending with the inevitability of old age, of entropy. Is this the extent of the dragon's legacy? The voice returned to Goku's mind, calm and unimpressed. Zalama was a craftsman of great skill, but he was flawed. He believed that power was about volume, that if you simply poured enough fire into a vessel, it would become a god. The Grand Priest landed on the edge of the crater, miles away, yet his presence filled the entire horizon. But true divinity, Son Goku, is not about how much you can destroy, the priest said, raising his hand. The space around his palm began to warp, twisting into complex geometric shapes, cubes and pyramids of pure white light that spun with dizzying speed. It is about how much you can control. Goku roared, the sound ripping through the thin atmosphere of the moon. He couldn't listen to this. He couldn't let the fear take root. If he stopped to think about the gap between them, he would lose. He had to act. He had to be the dragon. Shut up! Goku exploded from the crater, the ground beneath him turning to magma from the sheer friction of his launch. He became a red streak of violence, closing the distance in a fraction of a nanosecond. He pulled his fist back, the red aura condensing around his knuckles into a dragon's maw, teeth bared, ready to consume. He aimed for the Grand Priest's face, a strike meant to kill, a strike powered by the rejection of Whis, the betrayal of the heavens, the pain of the transformation. The Grand Priest did not dodge. He did not block. He simply shifted his gaze. The geometric shapes hovering around the priest's hand expanded instantly, forming a transparent, tessellated wall between them. Boom! Goku's fist collided with the barrier, but there was no shatter, there was no crack. Instead, the force of Goku's own punch was caught, spun around the geometry of the barrier, and fired directly back into his own arm. Snap! ARGH. Goku screamed as his right arm twisted unnaturally, the bones fracturing under the weight of his own strength. The recoil sent him spinning away, tumbling across the lunar dust. He skidded to a halt, clutching his broken arm. The dragon blood was already working, snapping the bones back into place with agonizing cracks. But the psychological damage was heavier. The Grand Priest lowered his hand, the geometric wall dissolving into sparkles of light. Crude, the priest noted, dusting off his shoulder, though no dust had touched him. You throw your power like a child throws a tantrum. Energy wasted on heat, on noise, on light. You bleed your intent before you even strike. The priest began to walk toward Goku again. Step by step, you sought the forbidden realm to challenge the angels, the priest said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming colder, more final. You wish to be a god of dragons. Very well. The halo behind the Grand Priest's head began to glow brighter, shifting from pale blue to a blinding, absolute white. Let us see if a dragon can survive the judgment of heaven. Goku watched the Grand Priest approach. The white light of the halo was expanding, bleaching the color from the universe. The red of Goku's aura, the gray of the moon, the black of space, all of it was being washed out, consumed by that terrible, purifying whiteness. It wasn't an attack. It was an environment. The Grand Priest was rewriting the reality of the battlefield, turning it into a domain where only order could exist. And in this domain, Goku, a creature of chaotic, primal rage, was suffocating. Goku tried to stand, but his legs felt like they were made of lead. The gravity around him had increased 1,000-fold. The air pressure was crushing his eardrums. The dragon's scales, which had regenerated only moments ago, began to hiss and smoke, reacting to the holy light like vampire flesh to the sun. "It burns," Goku gritted out, his voice a wet rasp. He looked at his hands. The scales were peeling back, revealing raw, steaming skin underneath. The primal power was rejecting the priest's presence, fighting a war on a cellular level that Goku was losing. Is this it? The thought drifted through his mind, unbidden. Is this the wall I can't climb? Whis walked away. Broly took my place. And now? I die here? Just another mistake to be erased? A memory flashed, not of training, not of fighting, but of the forbidden realm, the cave where Zalama sat, a massive, ancient shadow amidst the glowing crystals. "The power I give you is not a weapon, Son Goku." Zalama's voice rumbled in his memory, ancient and deep as the core of a planet. "It is a burden. The dragon consumes. It takes. It is greedy. If you let it drive, it will crash you. You must be the rider, not the steed." Goku clenched his fist, ignoring the pain of the peeling scales. The rider. He had been letting the anger drive him, the rage at Whis, the jealousy of Broly. He had let the dragon take the wheel, thinking that pure savagery would be enough to break the system. But savagery was just noise to the Grand Priest. Chaos could not defeat order. He needed focus. He needed technique. He needed a multiplier. Goku's breath hitched. A dangerous, insane idea sparked in the back of his mind. A technique from a lifetime ago. A technique that King Kai had warned him never to use with transformations that strained the body. A technique that multiplied not just power, but pain. Kaioken. To mix the volatile, heart-exploding stress of the Kaioken with the already unstable, body-destroying forbidden dragon bloodline. It was suicide. The mathematical probability of his heart exploding instantly was nearly 100%. But looking at the Grand Priest, who was now only 50 yards away, raising a hand to deliver the final erasure, Goku realized something. Probability didn't matter when the alternative was 0. "Hey," Goku whispered. The Grand Priest paused, his hand raised, a sphere of erasure energy forming in his palm. He looked down at the Saiyan, curiosity flickering in his eyes. Goku forced himself to his feet. His legs shook violently. Blood dripped from his chin, his nose, his ears, but he stood. "You said, 'I bleed my intent,'" Goku said, a crooked, bloody grin spreading across his face. The vertical pupils of his eyes dilated, focusing with a clarity that cut through the pain. "You said, 'just noise.'" Goku closed his eyes. He reached deep inside, past the dragon, past the rage, finding that small, quiet center of martial discipline that Roshi, Kami, King Kai, and Whis had built over decades. He grabbed the raging torrent of the dragon's power and held it. He didn't let it explode. He compressed it. "Let's see how you handle the noise." Goku's eyes snapped open. The gold pupils vanished, replaced by a blinding, screaming crimson when it's amplified. He took a breath, and then he screamed the words that defied physiology. "Kaioken times 20. Boom." The moon didn't just crack, it disintegrated. A pillar of energy erupted from Goku's body, so massive and violent that it dwarfed the Grand Priest's holy light. But it wasn't just red anymore. It was a terrifying, deep crimson, the color of oxygenated blood, the color of a dying star. The dragon aura and the Kaioken aura twisted together, fighting for dominance, creating a friction that sounded like a billion sheets of metal tearing at once. The Grand Priest's eyes widened slightly. For the first time, the calm geometry of his barrier flickered. Goku screamed, the sound lost in the roar of his own power. His muscles bulged, tearing the skin, only for the scales to instantly fuse the wounds shut. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird, beating so fast it was a continuous hum. He wasn't just a dragon anymore. He was a dragon on fire. He vanished. This time, there was no blur, no streak. He simply ceased to exist at point A and appeared at point B. Point B was directly in front of the Grand Priest. The priest reacted instantly, the geometric wall snapping into place. But this time, Goku didn't punch the wall. He punched through the concept of the wall. Crash. The barrier shattered like glass. The Grand Priest gasped, tilting his head back just as Goku's fist grazed his cheek. A single, thin line of blue ichor appeared on the Grand Priest's pale skin. Silence returned for a microsecond. The Grand Priest touched his cheek, looking at the blue blood on his fingertip. He looked up, and for the first time, the violet eyes were not cold. They were furious. The single drop of blue ichor floated in the vacuum, a tiny, impossible jewel. It was a contradiction. The Grand Priest, the entity who existed above the concept of injury, the one who polished the timeline like a precious stone, was bleeding. The sight of it sent a shockwave through the angel realm, a tremor felt by every remaining angel across the 12 universes. The axiom that the Father was untouchable had been disproven, and the man who disproved it was currently burning alive. Goku screamed, a sound that was half roar, half agony. The Kaioken X-20, layered over the dragon bloodline, was eating him from the inside out. His veins were glowing a bright, toxic magma orange beneath his skin. The red scales were cracking and reforming hundreds of times per second, unable to contain the sheer volume of energy threatening to tear his molecular structure apart. The Grand Priest's voice was no longer a whisper in the mind. He spoke aloud, and his voice carried the weight of a collapsing galaxy. You dare! The Grand Priest's aura exploded. It wasn't the calm, white light anymore. It was a kaleidoscope of blinding, prismatic colors, the true energy of the High Priest. The debris of the moon was instantly vaporized, not by heat, but by the sheer pressure of his existence expanding. He thrust his palm forward. Divine edict, sheath. A wave of erasure energy, invisible and absolute, rushed toward Goku. It was not a beam. It was a command for Goku's atoms to stop moving, to stop bonding, to stop being. Goku didn't dodge. He couldn't. The pain had locked his nervous system into a single directive: forward. Dragon. Goku threw his hands forward, the crimson aura spiraling around his arms, taking the shape of two twin dragons made of pure, unstable energy. He didn't fire a beam. He physically tore through the erasure wave. The collision was silent for a moment, and then the sound caught up a high-pitched shriek that shattered the nearby asteroids. Goku's hands burned as he pushed against the priest's command, his skin stripping away, his muscles exposing to the vacuum. But the dragon's scales surged, growing over the wounds instantly, darker and harder than before. He was adapting. In the crucible of this impossible pain, the Saiyan biology was forcing the dragon power to evolve. Goku smashed through the wave, closing the distance again. He swung a leg, a kick aimed at the priest's neck. The Grand Priest blocked with a forearm, but the impact sent a ripple through his robes. He was forced to slide back 1 foot, then 2. Impossible, the priest hissed, his composure fracturing. A mortal body cannot sustain this output. You should be dust. Goku gasped, swinging a fist that collided with the priest's knee, forcing the deity to buckle slightly. I don't care about limits. He was fighting like a man possessed. There was no elegance, no martial art form. It was a brawl. It was the desperate, flailing violence of a creature refusing to die. Every punch Goku landed broke his own hand, but he kept punching. Every kick shattered his shin, but he kept kicking. The Grand Priest, for all his infinite wisdom, was unaccustomed to this kind of fight. He was used to chess matches, to battles of technique and law. He was not used to a street fight against a man who was literally setting his own soul on fire to win. The priest's eyes narrowed. He realized he had made a mistake. He had treated this as a correction. He needed to treat it as an execution. "Enough," the priest said coldly. He vanished. Goku swung at empty air, his momentum carrying him forward. The Grand Priest reappeared directly above him, upside down, his finger pointed at the base of Goku's skull. A ring of complex, angelic runes spun around his finger, glowing with an ominous violet light. Angelic art, timeline severance. A beam of violet light, thin as a needle, fired down. It wasn't meant to blow Goku up. It was meant to cut his timeline, to sever the connection between his past and his future, erasing him from causality. Goku felt the coldness of the attack before it hit. His instinct screamed death. He twisted his body in midair, a movement that snapped his spine but allowed him to face the beam. He didn't block. He opened his mouth. The vertical pupils dilated until his eyes were entirely black. Dragon breath. A cone of red-black energy erupted from his mouth, meeting the violet needle beam head-on. The clash was instantaneous. The violet light drilled into the red breath, pushing it back, inch by inch, down toward Goku's throat. The Grand Priest's technique was superior. It was refined. It was perfect. But Goku's attack was heavy. It was dense with the weight of raw, unrefined existence. "Push!" Goku screamed in his mind. "Push past the limit. If the body breaks, let it break." The Kaioken aura flared one last time, turning white-hot at the edges. The red breath expanded, swallowing the violet beam. The Grand Priest's eyes widened in genuine shock as the red energy rushed up toward him. He teleported away instantly, but the edge of the blast caught the hem of his robe, disintegrating the divine fabric. He reappeared hundreds of meters away, staring at the panting, broken figure of the Saiyan. Goku floated there, his body smoking. His spine was broken, his arms hung limp. He was breathing in ragged, wet gasps. The Kaioken was fading, leaving only the dull, throbbing ache of a body that had been pushed too far. But he was still alive, and he was smiling. "Is that?" Goku wheezed, blood floating from his lips in bubbles. "All you got, Father?" The Grand Priest smoothed his torn robe. His expression settled into something terrifyingly blank. "No," he said softly. "It is not." He raised both hands. The entire dimension began to shake. The stars in the distance began to move, dragged from their orbits to form a massive, swirling constellation above the priest's head. "I will not merely kill you, son Goku," the Grand Priest intoned, the light gathering in his palms growing so bright it cast shadows on the fabric of space. "I will unmake the very idea of you." Goku looked up at the gathering apocalypse. He couldn't move his arms. He couldn't feel his legs. "I have one shot," he thought, feeling the last ember of the dragon power flickering in his chest. "One punch. Everything I have left. Everything I've ever been." He closed his eyes and began to gather the light. The Grand Priest did not fire a beam. He did not hurl a sun. He simply lowered his hands, and the universe began to fold. It was a technique of absolute dismantling. The space around Goku, the vacuum, the light, the gravity began to collapse inward, compressing into a singularity of pure erasure. It was the angelic decree, a maneuver reserved for purging timelines that had grown too cancerous to save. The stars above vanished, swallowed by the darkness of the closing cage. The silence was absolute. There was no air to carry a scream, no medium to carry a prayer. Goku floated in the center of the collapse, his limbs useless, his body a ruin of torn muscle and shattered scale. He watched the darkness close in. He could feel the concept of his own name beginning to fade from his memory, erased by the encroaching void. "So this is it," he thought, his internal voice strangely calm amidst the apocalypse. The wall I can't break. He tried to clench his fist, but his fingers were numb. The nerve endings had been burned away by the Kaioken. The primal power was silent, exhausted, retreating deep into the marrow of his bones to hide from the priest's light. But as the darkness pressed against his skin, a flicker of heat sparked in his chest. It wasn't the raging fire of the dragon, nor the screaming red of the Kaioken. It was smaller, quieter. It was the memory of a promise. We will get stronger. We always do. The faces flashed before him, Vegeta, smirking with bruised pride, Gohan, adjusting his glasses, Pan, laughing as she flew, and then the face of the one who had abandoned him, Whis. The heat in his chest flared. It wasn't hatred anymore. It was rejection. Goku rejected this ending. He rejected the idea that a god could decide where his limit lay. He rejected the mathematics of the Grand Priest. "Move," Goku whispered to his broken body. The dragon blood in his marrow woke up. It sensed the defiance. It sensed the madness of a host who refused to accept reality. And in that madness, the forbidden power found a new fuel source. It stopped burning Goku's body and started burning his will. Thump, his heart beat once. A sound so loud it vibrated through the collapsing void. The Grand Priest, watching the singularity compress, frowned. He felt a disturbance, a ripple in the fabric of the erasure. Thump, Goku's eyes snapped open. The sclera were no longer red, they were white. But the pupils were a swirling, chaotic nebula of crimson and black, shaped like a vertical slit. "I won't," Goku growled, the sound defying the vacuum. He forced his right arm up. The bones ground together, screaming, but the muscle obeyed. The red aura exploded around him again, but this time it was different. It wasn't leaking. It wasn't wild. It was solid. It coated his body like a second skin of liquid ruby. The singularity paused. "What?" the Grand Priest whispered, his eyes widening. Goku pulled his fist back. The energy didn't gather around his hand, it gathered inside it. The universe seemed to tilt, draining all remaining light, all remaining heat, all remaining hope into that single, trembling fist. A spectral dragon manifested behind him, not the European wyvern of before, but a serpentine eastern dragon of colossal size, its scales made of pure, unstable event horizons. This was no longer a technique. It was a desperate, final rebellion against the laws of physics. "Grand Priest," Goku screamed, the name tearing his throat apart. The Grand Priest realized, a fraction of a second too late, that he was not looking at a mortal anymore. He was looking at an anomaly that threatened the architecture of the multiverse. "Cease him!" the priest shouted, thrusting both hands forward to accelerate the collapse. But Goku had already thrown the punch. Omega, Dragon, Fist. He punched the singularity. For a nanosecond, nothing happened. The fist met the darkness. Time stood still. Then the universe screamed. It was a sound of glass breaking on a cosmic scale. The singularity didn't just explode. It inverted. The angelic decree shattered into a billion shards of white light. Goku's fist, wrapped in the roaring avatar of the Crimson Dragon, tore through the erasure technique and kept going. It tore through the vacuum. It tore through the dimension. A beam of red-black energy, shaped like a roaring dragon, erupted from the impact point. It was so massive it eclipsed the galaxy. It swallowed the Grand Priest's vision, forcing the Father of Angels to cross his arms and deploy his absolute barrier, the halo of the High One. Crash! The Omega Dragon crashed into the Grand Priest. The barrier held, but the force behind it was catastrophic. The Grand Priest was launched backward, his feet carving trenches through the fabric of space-time itself. He gritted his teeth, the veins on his forehead bulging as he struggled to contain the feral, impossible weight of the attack. "He is pushing. M.E." The Grand Priest gasped, his heels digging into the void. But the attack didn't stop there. The dragon energy, denied its target by the priest's barrier, sought a path of least resistance. It deflected upward. It shot vertically, piercing the ceiling of the universe. It tore through the dimensional barrier separating the mortal realm from the world of void. It pierced the swirling nebulas of the neutral zone. It kept rising, higher, higher, past the understanding of mortals, past the domain of the Kais. The palace floated in the eternal white nothingness, a sanctuary of absolute silence and play. The two Xenos were hovering in mid-air, playing a game of marbles with planets from a dead timeline. "Roll it, the future Xeno giggled. "I am rolling, I am rolling," the present Xeno laughed. The atmosphere was light, innocent, terrifyingly simple. Then the floor shook. It started as a vibration, rattling the marbles. Then a low hum, deep and angry, resonated through the infinite white pillars. The great priest's attendants, standing by the doors, looked around in confusion. Nothing ever shook the palace. It was the center of all things. It was immovable. "What is that?" Future Xeno asked, stopping his game. "Is it an earthquake?" Present Xeno tilted his head. Crack! The sound was like a gunshot in a library. Right in the center of the palace floor, between the two Omni Kings, a fissure appeared. It zigzagged across the pristine, indestructible tile, glowing with a faint, dying ember of crimson light. Smoke-red, sulphurous smoke curled up from the crack, smelling of blood and burnt ozone. The Xenos floated closer, staring at the fracture. "The floor broke," Present Xeno whispered, his voice dropping to a hush. "Who broke the floor?" Future Xeno asked, his eyes narrowing, the innocence vanishing instantly. They looked down into the crack. Through the abyss of dimensions, through the layers of reality, they could see a faint, flickering red light, miles and universes away. Back on the shattered moon, the silence had returned. The Grand Priest stood alone in the void. His robes were tattered. His halo was dim. He was breathing heavily, his hands trembling slightly as he lowered them. In front of him, the Omega Dragon Fist had dissipated. Goku was gone. Where the Saiyan had been, there was only a drifting cloud of red dust and a lingering tear in reality that refused to close. The Grand Priest walked forward, stepping over the fracture in space. He looked around, scanning for a life force, for a heartbeat, for a soul. There was nothing. But as the Grand Priest looked up, following the path of the destruction, he saw the hole in the sky. He saw the path the energy had taken. And he realized, with a dawn of horror, where that strike had landed. He fell to one knee, bowing his head toward the ceiling of the universe, not in prayer, but in apology. "He did not just challenge me." The Grand Priest whispered to the silence. He knocked on the king's door. The stars burned quietly, as if afraid to witness what would happen when the door opened.